Let's focus on what you call the priority drift. What is that? And how can couples stop it from happening?
Priority drift occurs when two people have similar priorities at one point in their relationship, usually in the beginning, and then those priorities go unchecked in on, and gradually over time, occasionally suddenly, if there's a traumatic event, they drift because they go unspoken. In the beginning of their relationship, maybe they're both prioritizing their career, and then gradually one partner shifts to maybe be more family oriented and safety oriented and health oriented. And if they don't check in, then one person is still very focused on their career. And it can seem like neglect to the other partner because their priorities have stayed the same, but one's changed, and they often expect their other partner to change at the same pace, which isn't really realistic. So we have to check in with each other.
This is episode number 669 with Nick Brancato. We are speaking today about how to unlock the keys to lasting love with one simple proven test. We love simple proven tests here at Last First Date Radio. So I can't wait to share this conversation with you. If you're single or if you're in a relationship, it is important to know the keys to lasting love. Hi, everybody. I'm Sandy Weiner. I am a certified dating and relationship coach. And every week I bring you expert advice and real conversations about love, connection, and healthy relationships. At Last First Date Radio, we believe it is never too late to go on your last first date. For more information on my coaching programs, my courses, my 3 books, and more, go to lastfirstdate.com. And before I bring on my guest, I want to invite you to join my Facebook group. It's called Your Last First Date. So if you are a woman over 40 and you want to come to a fabulous group that is supportive, positive, kind, has boundaries, come and join us at Your Last First Date. And now for my guest. Nick Brancato is a personal development coach and educator with over 25 years of experience helping individuals and couples connect, communicate, and thrive. He has a master's degree in education and a background as a Microsoft systems engineer, and he blends practical tools with data-driven frameworks to guide people through life's challenges, including career shifts, financial pressures, and personal growth. Welcome to the podcast, Nick.
Hi, I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Happy to have you and talk about this important topic, how to unlock those keys to lasting love. I think everybody wants it. It's in the name of my podcast, The Last First Date. I think everybody wants to know that this is going to last. And so before we get into the book you wrote and why you wrote it and all the techniques you share, I would love to hear a little bit about how you ended up in this field.
Sure, it's my pleasure. So my background is actually as a Microsoft systems engineer working on computer networks. And I also have a master's degree in education. I used to be a tenured high school teacher. So I've always loved teaching and I've always loved systems. And I actually was a professional poker player for a while and the lead instructor for the World Poker Tour. And I did a lot of poker coaching on high stakes decision making under pressure and on mindset management. And so I came into this field in sort of a backwards way as far as working with couples. And that is that when I was working with poker players, it's long days playing these tournaments. It's 10, 12, 14-hour days, multiple days in a row, sometimes as long as a week. And so the mental side of the game is as important as the skill side of the game, maybe more important. And what I found in working with poker players was that it wasn't so much the strategic elements of the game that they were struggling with, but rather the mindset components. And so much of that had to do with their primary relationships and what was going on away from the table. And so you have to be like in the zone and very focused to play these long days. And even though there's breaks here and there, it's very hard to communicate with anyone else and stay in the right frame of mind. So one of the main issues was communication between couples. And so I began working with the partner of the poker players on their mindset and on understanding the priorities of the poker player as they were going on. And so I began doing more and more couples coaching and sort of got into it that way.
Interesting. There's often these little breadcrumbs we can follow, right? We think, oh, how did you get from Microsoft systems and teaching high school to working with couples? But I definitely see the connection. I think that your one thing led to the next, and being good at mindset is important for everything. Being good at systems is a good idea when you're running your own business and when you want to write a book, for sure. You need a system and teaching people systems, because I think we're all looking for that. What is the secret to helping us to get better at something? And we don't see that on our own. So let's focus on what you call the priority drift. What is that? I mean, I think I can guess, but what is it, and how can couples prevent it from happening or stop it from happening?
So, priority drift occurs when two people have similar priorities at one point in their relationship, usually in the beginning, and then those priorities go unchecked in on and often undiscussed. And gradually over time, occasionally suddenly, if there's a traumatic event, or something, a milestone happens, but for the most part, they drift because they go unspoken. And so people might start with at two places in the beginning of their relationship. Maybe they're both prioritizing their career, and then gradually one partner shifts to maybe be more family oriented and safety oriented and health oriented. And if they don't check in, then one person is still very focused on their career, and it can seem like neglect to the other partner often, because their priorities have stayed the same, but one's changed, and they often expect their other partner to change at the same pace, which isn't really realistic. So we have to check in with each other.
It makes sense. I think that people in general don't check in enough. I mean, at the start of any coaching relationship, I tell them that the relationship exists. It's a co-active relationship. So we both contribute to it. We both state at the outset what we want, what the goals are, and we continue to revisit and talk about it throughout the time we're together. Otherwise, you don't set it and forget it. Like it's not the way life works, right? And like you
Yes.
said, there are many times when we interpret somebody's inaction or lack of growth, or what we perceive as the growth that we wanted or expected, as something bad or wrong. And they're obviously not on the same page. And then we can get resentful, and contempt is the worst thing we can feel. And so, what do you suggest when there is this priority drift, and how can people start to move away from it and reconnect?
First, I would suggest checking in on your priorities, your own individual priorities. So in the book, I identify like 10 core life priorities that cover most aspects of life. And you just rank them 1 through 10, one being the highest and 10 being the lowest. So one's your top priority. So if your top priority is health, that's number one. If your lowest priority is entertainment, that's number 10. And so doing this assessment is very important, because we often don't deliberately think about one thing being more important than the other. We have a tendency to just think we can do it all. And so after you do this self-assessment, I would encourage you to take a look at how you spend your time, and how much time per week do you spend on each priority. And so this is so that we make sure our actions are in alignment with our intentions. Because we may say entertainment's our lowest priority, but if we spend 20 hours a week on it, maybe it's not our lowest priority. How we allocate our resources speak to our true priorities. So to avoid priority drift, after doing this self-assessment, I would check in with my partner around these priorities, and I would suggest small, medium, and large check-ins. And it doesn't have to be about the priorities literally, but when you do a check-in, I would say that there's two rules. One, no devices during the check-in, no screens, and the other is no talking about other people. So you can talk about yourself and each other and the relationship with those two things. So a small check-in might be 5 or 10 minutes a day. My wife and I, for example, have like a hot beverage ritual in the morning. We wake up at the same time, and whoever has an easier time getting up makes the hot beverages. We sit down and we check in for 10 minutes, and we ask each other what are our top three priorities for the day? Or what do we have any big decisions for the day? Do we have any decisions for the day? It could be something as small as what are we eating for lunch? It could be something as serious as do I want to stay in my career at this job? So whatever's going on at the time, priorities speak to what's important now as opposed to values, which are more like your belief system and they're more stable.
So it doesn't have to be this major monthly meeting. I mean, I think that's the problem. First of all, people don't check in at all, but when they do check in, it's too much. There's too much on the table. I have a client who got into a relationship after we've been working for a while, and she has weekly check-ins with him. They have their goal setting check-ins, they have their money check-ins, I mean, it's one of the most intentional relationships because they don't let anything slide. It's like, we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about what we need if we're going to move in together. What do you need? What do I need? Why is that important to you? Maybe this isn't the right time because of these reasons. What do we need to put in place? So if you have a long-term relationship and you're already been living together for a while, that morning coffee is a great idea, or a Friday night when the end of the week comes and having a bigger check-in. And so people would be checking in about their priorities, they're checking in about their values. Are they living into those values? Like, what are some of the other things that get discussed when you
So
have a check-in?
a big thing that gets discussed is decisions. So my wife and I, for example, we ask, what are the three decisions we're going to be making today or in the next week? And so we give each other context around what we're thinking about and what's important to us. Also just asking, like, what are your top three priorities? Doesn't have to be from a list, doesn't have to be from the book, just what's important to you right now. Write them down separately and just share those afterward. It's always surprising what you discover. And so often, as you were saying earlier, we have this tendency to fill the gaps and make up these false narratives when we don't know what's going on with our partner because we don't check in. And so just having a little context about what's important to them lets us understand what goes on throughout the day. So when they're late, it's not that they're neglecting me, it's that they're focused on their career for this interval because they're up for a promotion or at risk of a layoff or whatever the case may be.
So that's their priority. And sometimes people are late because they're poor with time management, but they're trying to do too many things. So we put labels on people. They're lazy, they're arrogant, they're whatever, they're just selfish. But if we don't check in, we don't know the why behind why people do the things they do. And so I love this because it eliminates all of that assumption and that projection that people do and that ruin many relationships.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest benefits is that it makes something that's normally very emotional and feelings driven, objective, and data driven. So, like, your priorities are your priorities, mine are mine. And what we're going to do is we're going to get curious about each other. We're going to have curious conversations. We want to adopt a learning stance and ask, why is this your priority? Why is this an important decision you're making today? And we really want to lean into understanding completely the why of what our partner's priorities are, because we might even have the same priority but not for the same reason, and that's important to understand as well.
Yeah, and I think often people also become fixated on certain qualities that a person has before they get to know them. Like in my experience in the dating world, religion is a big one, politics is another, where somebody might assume something about you because you share the same political beliefs, supposedly, or the same religion, but you practice completely differently and you have different values around your political beliefs, right? So it's so easy to put people in a box without getting curious and being open and trying to understand each other. I think that's so critical.
Absolutely. You nailed it with politics and religion and also sex. Those
Mm.
are the big three that I experience in my coaching where people maybe they don't talk about them or haven't talked about them enough or talked about them briefly in the beginning of their relationship. And then, like you said, go on with all these assumptions and put their partner in a box. And I think one of the huge problems when people get into long term relationships is they sort of treat it like it's a one off decision. Like, I'm going to be with who you are now, and then you're going to stay that way, and I'm going to keep being me, and you're going to stay the way you are, rather than making a decision to be together, to adjust in the future, to grow together, to change together, to accept each other's growth, even if it's in different ways.
People change. You know, that's the nature of humans. Hopefully, you're growing and you're changing in the relationship. And there are certain core foundational elements to a relationship that hopefully don't change. But within that, you do want to encourage each other to change and grow together, hopefully, maybe not at the same pace, but that's why these check ins are important. So you're not saying, well, I did all this work and you didn't do anything. And the sex piece, and I'm glad you brought that up because I have my clients do the erotic blueprint test, the assessment, because half the time we don't even know what our preferences are sexually. Like we may never have explored the outer edges of our sexuality. And when you do that, then you can communicate with each other. This is something I enjoy or I'd like to explore. And I remember watching, there was, I think, a Netflix series on sex, and they were talking about how one of the guys, did you see that? This, you're
I
nodding
think
your
so,
head.
yes.
I forgot. I think it was with Gwyneth Paltrow. It was her production, I think. They brought in the people who created the blueprint, the erotic blueprint. And there was a guy who thought his wife was just pretty much asexual and never saw her as the more that had a strong libido, didn't see her as who she really was because she didn't even know herself. And to find out after taking the assessment that she actually had very strong libido, she just never had the right stimulation. She didn't know how to express herself. So I think all of these things, and that brings me to my next question about self-awareness, because so many people don't even know themselves. So you say that self-awareness is a critical component in the alignment in relationships. Tell me more about that.
Self awareness is such a critical component to alignment in relationships because if you don't know yourself, it's impossible to know other people. But you can think that you know them, you'll feel that you know them, but you won't. And this actually is very much like what happens in poker. You're playing, you're disguising your hand, you're hiding your cards, and your opponent's doing the same. And so many poker players are pretty sure they know what their opponent has, but they don't even know what they would do in that situation when I ask them. And so that happens in relationships too. People don't even know what their priorities are, but they think they know what their partner's priorities are. So unless you take stock and check in with yourself and do an inventory assessment of what are my priorities, just list them all. And then after you list them, rank them. If you need a starting point, great. You can use prioritize us. But if you don't need a starting point, just doing it is so impactful. And then ask yourself, what's my satisfaction around each priority? How much effort am I putting forth around each priority? And really take a look at that. How am I dedicating my resources? How am I using my time? How am I using my money? How am I using my energy around each of these priorities? And check in and see if it's in alignment with your life goals, with your vision for your future, and then do the same in your relationships. Do we have a shared vision? Are our priorities aligned? If they're not, is it okay that they're not aligned? Are they complementary? Or is it a big red flag? And this might be a deal breaker, like you were mentioning earlier, because it's something that's not going to change in a person.
It's just such an important thing to know yourself. I think it's at the bottom, that it's at the base of every successful relationship. Like you said, you can't know others because you don't even know yourself. And something I do at the beginning of coaching also is to give people what I call the operating manual. And it actually it's for them to keep, but it's for them to have that self-discovery of who am I in the three key areas of compatibility. And I break it down to the practical day-to-day, the sexual compatibility, and the worldview compatibility. So that kind of includes a lot of the basics. And then I ask them to tell me, was anything here of a surprise to you? Like, is there anything in here that you failed to either identify in yourself or to relate to somebody else, relay to somebody else that you were dating. Because often what I found is that people did not speak up. They didn't even, either they didn't know that this was true about themselves, or they knew and were afraid to say because it felt like too much. And so I think what you're asking people to do is to look through, and you're giving them 10, pick 10. This is not a lot, you're really ranking them. And we often say it's really important for me to do something, and then we don't do it. So how important is it really? And what are you doing? Why are you avoiding it? So when you coach people, do you talk to them about, like, why are they avoiding the things that they say are important?
The biggest thing that I find when I'm working with individuals or couples and I'm looking at avoidance is what are they spending their time on instead, or how are they allocating their resources instead? Could be their money, could be their energy, could be their thoughts, but what are they spending their time on instead? If it's something simple like entertainment, scrolling, browsing, watching TV, that content that you're not learning from or growing from, maybe that you're not even enjoying often, that's not even giving you the entertainment value. Can we reallocate our time elsewhere? So I think that a big part of focus is deciding what to not pay attention to. And so sort of trimming the fat and lopping off the areas where there's too much waste or misallocation of resources based on the priorities that are the actual intentions. So how do we get our actions in alignment with those intentions?
You have to know your yeses and your nos. It's not just, I'm saying yes to this, right? There's only a
Yes.
certain amount of time and resources in a day, and we get to choose how we focus. Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Music Unlimited. You can listen to over 70 million songs and thousands of playlists and stations. Plus, you can now stream your favorite podcasts, like Last First Date Radio. You can listen to any song, anytime, anywhere, on any of your devices. Get Amazon Music Unlimited for free for 30 days. Just head on over to getamazonmusic.com/last first date to learn more and claim this offer. You also talk about that there's a positive impact that's bigger than the relationship. When you get this work done and you are aligning with a partner, or even probably within yourself, I would assume that there's a bigger impact that extends outside of your partnership. So tell us a little more about how that works.
Absolutely. As you become more aligned yourself and more aligned in your relationship, and as you communicate around these priorities, what you find is that you start to understand other people more, and you start to ask better and better questions. You start to be more curious. You start to ask more whys in the people around you, in your family members, in your coworkers. It helps you be more empathetic, and your empathy grows because you're now understanding why people are taking certain actions. What are their motives? What are the reasons things are important to them or not important to them? And so this extends to all your relationships. It increases your ability to communicate, and it makes you a more sustainably growth oriented person because you're continuously doing these micro things every day, these little check-ins or these medium-sized check-ins, whether they're weekly or quarterly or whatever, you're doing them. And so you're thinking differently as a result of doing them. You're learning about yourself and you're learning about your partner, and that makes you more interesting, and that also makes you more adept at learning about the people around you and then acting with regard for the things that you learn.
Yeah, that is such a beautiful thing when you get to that place in life, and you're grounded. I mean, really, you're grounded in what's important to you, and then you're sort of that solid tree that can then extend that grace to other people, and you're no longer reacting to everything that's going on around you because you know yourself well, and you don't have to prove yourself, and all the things that we spend so many of our years of our lives doing, and just thinking that we have to look perfect and we have to prove who we are. And then you just kind of let go of a lot of that stuff, and you stay open and curious about others. And that's that growth mindset that is so important it's the kind of people that I know I want to be around. You just don't want to be around the victims who stay stuck, who just blame the rest of the world for everything. No fun.
Absolutely. That's so true. And one of the big red flags that I find in relationships that's often a deal breaker or potentially should be a deal breaker if it's not, is where the priorities align around growth. When one partner puts growth in their top three and another partner puts it in their bottom three, and they understand the vocabulary of the word and they agree what it means, and one is just not growth oriented or personal development oriented or skill acquisition oriented, and the other partner is, that's sort of a recipe for disaster because one person's going to be changing very deliberately and continuously over the course of the relationship, and the other is going to be staying stagnant or atrophying and clinging to the person they were while the other person is becoming the person they are. And so it's a big red flag I find in any relationships when growth is very different as a priority.
I agree. I think what a lot of people who come to me say is if the person hasn't already done the work, then they don't even want to date them. And I try to reframe that to, are they open? Are they open to growth? Maybe they didn't have as many years of therapy or coaching as you did, but the fact that they're open, that they don't get shut down around hard conversations, that to me is much more important than you could do 10 years of therapy and it didn't really work. I've seen that happen. And you can do 6 months of therapy and change forever. So, when you try to use those markers as a way to judge somebody instead of seeing who they really are, that's equally important. But I have been in a marriage where I was just always growing, and my husband wasn't open to any hard conversation. He would get shut down. We just spent the morning together, and and it was interesting because it's been quite a long time since our divorce, about 17 years, and we're in a good place now. But he's still the same person in many ways. He's a little more open, and we were comparing our experiences around a crisis in our lives that really started to push us apart. And he had no recollection of some of the things that I had done and how I had grown. He was like, "Oh, you did that? Oh, I didn't know that." I'm like, wow, memory is really interesting. But I can talk about it today without anger, without any expectation, and we just have a better relationship because I have just stepped into who I am, and I don't have any false expectations about who he needs to be anymore.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's pretty crazy when you think back at different memories and another person's perspective on you and whether or not they noticed something profoundly different in you, a big change, a major growth, a traumatic event. It could be
Mhm.
so different for them. And when you're looking at these relationships, what you really need is a cheerleader, a support system for your growth. So if they're not going to be growing themselves very proactively, how much do they support your growth? How much do they encourage it? Are they your cheerleader? Do
Mhm.
they make space for you to do personal development or skill acquisition? Do they encourage it? Do they believe you should allocate your time and resources to it?
Yeah, that's so important. And I remember even the courage that it took for me to speak up and have hard conversations with other people in my life. He would be so uncomfortable with that and make fun of it instead of
Uh,
supporting it. So I couldn't be who I needed to be in that relationship. That I stayed a very long time, 23 years, but I don't regret staying and I don't regret leaving. I couldn't have grown any more as a person if I stayed, and my kids have benefited. And I think that's another false belief is that you stay for the children and your children will be screwed up if you leave. And I think they really benefited from us being two separate people, so they could see us as separate people and they could really understand us as separate people. And they have relationships with both of us. But this isn't about divorce. So let's go back to something that you call the total difference score, the TDS framework. Tell us about that and how you apply it.
Sure, the total difference score is the result you get when you take the Prioritize Us test, and it's basically a relationship credit score. So it tells you most people don't know how to measure the strength of their relationship at all beyond vague emotions. And this tells you instantly how aligned you are, what's working, what needs improvement, where do we need to communicate. And so what you do is you rank 10 core life priorities, which encompass most aspects of day to day life. You just rank them 1 through 10. You do that yourself, and then you have your partner do the same. So then we're going to compare the difference between each priority. So if career is a priority we're examining, and I rank it as number 2 and you rank it as number 5, the difference between 2 and 5 is 3. So there's a difference of 3 on career. We do that across all 10 priorities, and then we add it up. And that gives us a number between 0 and 50. That's the TDS, or total difference score. 0 means we're perfectly aligned. We're almost the same person. That doesn't really happen. It's like 1 in a trillion. So you don't really have to worry about that.
Yeah.
50 means we're like completely different people. We view the world in opposite ways, most likely, and we're going to need a lot of communication. Somewhere in the 20s, you start to get into the complementary range where we might have some differences in priorities, but maybe we fill each other's gaps to some extent. If you're perfectly aligned or too aligned, you might have some blind spots together as a couple, though you'll probably have very easy decision making together and good communication around most of life's conversations.
You start to really understand each other and where you align and where you don't. And yeah, nobody has to align perfectly. I mean, I think part of what creates attraction is where we are not exactly the same. But if we're fighting each other and we're also not respecting each other's values and strengths, then that becomes an issue, I imagine.
Yes, absolutely. I think of everybody kind of like a piece of Swiss cheese. So everybody has gaps in their knowledge, but every piece of Swiss cheese is different, so they're not the same gaps. And when you line up two pieces of Swiss cheese, we sort of plug some of each other's gaps, and that's what happens in a good relationship. You're sort of complementary, and if there's an area that's a priority, a high priority for you, maybe it's not for me, but that can be okay because we're covering each other's gaps.
Mhm.
You have to be very careful though, because sometimes the gaps are too big and we have to work on reconciling those differences. So if there's a difference in a priority that's really large, like a 7 or an 8 or a 9, then what I would encourage people to do is start with a strength. So look at a priority that's aligned, where there's a very small difference or the difference is 0. So you have the same priority ranked the same way. And start with your strengths and look, this is a pillar of our relationship. Why are we aligned on this? What's good about it? And examine your top 3 strengths before you dive into the conversations about your differences, because they'll be much easier to have when you ask why about something that you already have more of an understanding of and can relate to, than asking why about something you feel completely opposite about.
Sounds like it's also kind of the same philosophy of you attract more positivity with honey than whatever whatever that saying is, than vinegar. It's you want to start with what's working, and you like, oh, we already agree on this, or we align with this, and that makes sense to me. That then you can feel safe enough to discuss the things that you may have different opinions about. I think also a lot of times people have ideas or beliefs around things that they haven't really looked at in such a long time that they believe this is important to them. You're nodding your head. So tell me how that shows up with the people you work with.
That's so dead on, because so many people have unexamined beliefs, unexamined values, and default priorities where they just think they're supposed to prioritize their career or their relationships, but maybe they shouldn't be at this point. But they're just defaulting to their career is the most important thing. And even though life has changed and they now have a family and their health is in decline and they should be prioritizing that, they're just defaulting to putting all their time and resources into their career.
Mhm.
An example that I have is a couple that I was working with is They had a huge difference in how they ranked sex. One person ranked it number two and the other ranked it number 10. So that's a difference of eight.
Mhm.
Okay, so when we take a look at this, why is it such a large difference? That's really big. Let's look at a strength first. So where do they align? Well, they both had spirituality as number one. So I asked them to look at how do they spend their resources, how much time is allocated a week to spirituality individually and as a couple. And what I found was that there was almost no time spent on spirituality together as a couple and very little spent individually. And what's interesting is that this is how they met. They met in a spiritual way. And so that was where they built the foundation of their relationship. In the beginning, they were doing a lot of spirituality individually and regularly as a couple, weekly or more. And so what we did is we created some small rituals around spirituality every day, a 10-minute ritual, and then once a week, a 2-hour one, whether that's attending a ceremony or doing it by themselves or with their family. And so over time, as they began to connect again over spirituality, all of a sudden they started to reconnect in other ways. And so sex became back on the table for the one partner where it was a 10 because they weren't connecting in any of the ways that they had in the beginning of their relationship. So sex started going up on the list gradually to where now it's much more regular and sustainable and sort of at an equilibrium, where before it was just way lopsided. And so, as you were saying earlier about sex, it really is a form of communication and such an important and underrated one. And so, doing something like a blueprint or diving into conversations is so important around that topic, but especially if there's any differences. The larger the difference in score, the more important it is to do that kind of work.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that you touched on, which is part of that beautiful story, is that the thing that connected them at the beginning, which led to attraction, led to connection, was missing. And so a lot of times the glue is gone and you got to glue them back together. So even while sex was important, more important to one partner, the other partner probably also enjoyed sex when the connection was good. And so you helped with both of those aspects, which is a beautiful thing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really so wonderful. It's amazingly gratifying. And just to see people change and improve and know that you can. So often it's not that there's love lost, it's misalignment. It's not a lack of love that's killing the relationship. It's the fact that we have different priorities or undiscussed priorities, just hidden areas that you can easily uncover by just doing a few simple exercises in 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's a really important reframe, which brings me to my final question for anybody who wants to go on their last first date. What are your final words of advice?
My final words of advice for anybody that wants to go on their last first date is that relationships take work, but they don't need to be identical to work. You don't have to have perfect alignment with your partner. They just require understanding and intentional conversations and small, meaningful adjustments. So if you work on yourself to be the person that you want to be, then you'll attract the partner that you want. But if you're not who you want to be, then it's not realistic to assume or expect that you can just acquire the person you're going to be with for the rest of your life without working on yourself first.
Really good advice. Somebody who completes me is the biggest fallacy in the world. And it's steered us in the wrong direction. I mean, I remember thinking that's what I needed when I was in my 20s, somebody who's going to have all the things that I don't have and somehow will just be these two puzzle pieces that are going to connect together. And the more, that's why I like working with people who are over 40, 50, 60, 70, because they hopefully know themselves a lot better. And they've already been formed over many decades. And there is something about that. Like, I know what I will and won't tolerate in person. I know myself. And so I know I'm going to be discerning and I'm going to choose a partner who is going to align, or I'll stay single because both of those will work for me. But, it's like you are going to have a much better time of it when you work on yourself, when you know yourself and you know your own priorities and you know what time, your effort you're putting into all of it. And that's how you're going to attract your last first date. So thank you, Nick. I would love for you to tell us, you have a free gift for our audience. Can you let us know what that is?
I do, absolutely. So all anyone listening, if you'd like to get a free copy of Prioritize Us, you can get the ebook at nickbrancato.com. It's nickbrancato.com. You can just go there and get a free copy of Prioritize Us. If you'd like a paperback, you can go on Amazon and get a paperback or a hardcover. And if you're interested in any of these things further, you can check me out on Instagram at personal dev coach, DEV like development, personal dev coach on Instagram. And feel free to DM me if you have any questions or if you're interested in learning more. I'd love to hear from you. I love working with couples and I love individuals who are proactive and interested in personal growth and development. So I'm always happy to talk with people.
Awesome. And you might even get a better poker game out of it, right?
That's right.
Well, thank you so much, Nick. This is a really very inspiring conversation. I think just knowing what's important to focus on is so much of the work that we need to do. And you've figured out a system to make it easier for people. So go check Nick out. And thank you again for coming on the show and sharing with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. If you love our show, please give us a high rating and review on Apple Podcasts. I think you can also review us on Spotify. There's a place for comments. I read all the comments. I love your reviews. And as always, here's to your last first date. If you are ready to get unstuck, gain new tools, become more empowered, and finally find your last first date, I'd love to talk to you. Fill out an application to be considered for a complimentary half-hour love breakthrough session at lastfirstdate.com/application.